We're going to go now to Austria to hear from Uli. Uli is a teacher and an activist in the RSO, and he organizes with healthcare workers there, and he publishes a workplace newsletter in hospitals in Vienna. Uli, thank you for joining us.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I will tell you a few things about Austria first, which I think are important to grasp the situation. So this is a map of Austria, and I will be concerned mainly with two regions. First, Vienna, which is where I am in the east of Austria, and Tyrol in the west. This is important because it is a region where there is a lot of tourism. Now, Austria has got a population of 9 million people. I think it's important to get a sense of the proportions because they are very different in the three countries we are concerned with. In the capital, Vienna, there live close to 2 million people, so it's it's close to a fourth of the Austrian population. The GDP is $461 billion. That was measured in 2018. The politics in Austria can be characterized as authoritarian neoliberalism. We had lots of cuts following the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008 up to the sovereign debt crisis in 2010 with Greece and so on. So there has been actually there were many authoritarian developments, and that reached a peak with the last government we had, which abdicated in May. So the last government was it consisted of the right-wing Freedom Party and the Conservative People's Party. They introduced the 12-hour working day, and I think that says a lot about the current political situation in Austria, because in Austria, the unions didn't even react with strikes or anything like that. We only had one big demonstration with about 100,000 people, but that was like the way in which the unions fought back, and they didn't do anything after that. Now we have a new government which consists of, well, actually the same racist People's Party, which was in a government with the right wing before. Now they are in government with the Green Party. We don't know what their sort of green capitalism will look like, but I think how they're treating the corona crisis says a lot about the development which will follow. So here I have a picture. In the middle you see Sebastian Kurz, which is like the main figure of the People's Party, and beside him the green Werner Kogler. What is so important about Kurz is that he really changed the political culture in Austria. We have that kind of social partnership, which means that the representatives of employers and employees are working together and try to sort things out. But this has drastically changed because Sebastian Kurz really just does what the big industry in Austria wants without having to argue with unions or anybody else. He doesn't even, well, when he introduced the bill of the 12-hour working day, he also did not talk to employees' representatives, but just pushed it through parliament, which is, it was a break with the political tradition in Austria. Now, Austria is probably internationally, there was some talk about Austria because Austria had responded quickly to COVID-19, at least that was what the government said. On March the 15th, there was a decree by the health department. They had shops closed except for food stores. Schools, kindergartens closed. They had this sort of so-called social distancing, which is in reality physical distancing of 1 meter. In some areas, there even were quarantines, and in general, it's like everybody is in isolation. You can only leave your house to do your daily shopping, go to work, or exercise if necessary. That leads to a very strange situation with the police that I will talk about later. As you can see in this graph, the red line is just these restrictive measures on the Austrian public that I've been talking about, which was introduced on the 15th of March. You can see there was that flattening of the curve that was often talked about. So in orange, you see the people who are infected with corona, and the blue bar above the orange bars shows all the people who have already recovered from corona. So more and more people are recovering. The question is if, like with the measures that will follow, if that is the development that will continue, or if there will be many more infections in the future. At the moment, there is a quick reboot of the economy. So on April the 14th, smaller shops could open again with only some restrictions. On the 4th of May, shopping centers should be reopened, and also schools gradually, but allegedly only for the final examinations of students who are finishing school at 18 or 19 years. So in order to illustrate the priorities of, well, those politicians in Austria who are talking a lot about national unity, this example shows very clearly what the main conflicts of interest are. You can see this really idyllic place in the mountains in Austria, people skiing, and it was exactly in these hotspots of winter tourism that many infections happened, not only of Austrian people, but people from all over Europe who are traveling there in winter. So on March the 7th, there was a confirmed case of corona in a small town with loads of tourism in Tyrol. In Iceland, some tourists had already returned to where in Austria to go skiing. They had positive tests and corona. So Iceland already had warnings issued about Austria that people should not go there for their skiing holidays. And the skiing season in Austria only closed on March 15th. So people actually who were infected with corona in Austria in that time got more information from the government in Iceland than from the government in Austria. So the priorities are very clear. Businesses should just keep running. Health was not a big issue as long as there were stable profits. Now, the economy in Austria, I think that this development is similar to France or the US. Now, in March, there were 12% of the working population unemployed. In the first 3 weeks of Corona, 200,000 people filed for unemployment, which is a lot with a population of only 9 million people. Most of the people filing for unemployment were from the hotel or catering industry, construction, transport, and to a bit lesser extent from commerce and manufacturing. I will now talk briefly about state-funded short-time work, which will also be an issue for our German comrades. This just means that the state is subsidizing companies with, like, workers can, well, the companies file short-time work for their workers, and if workers don't work, the state will pay for the hours they don't work. So the companies only pay the workers who really work, while they have, well, actually, as long as the business is running and workers are there, the company pays. all the time that workers are outside their companies, they won't get paid. And in Austria, workers get 80 to 90% of their wages after taxes, which is actually quite good and better than in Germany. And the state spent, well, the funds, they were getting bigger and bigger. As you can see, on March the 28th, the state provided only €500,000, and on April the 6th, that changed to 5 billion euros. It sounds incredible, but that's the truth. So on March the 24th, I've read about a stimulus of 38 billion euros. So more and more money is pumped into the economy. So the figures are constantly changing, but the sum is just huge. And according to the IMF, our economy will contract by 7%. So most of the things that are bad due to Corona will probably become even worse during and after Corona when it comes to unemployment, especially. Police repression is also a huge topic. I only have 2 examples here. There are no more extensive studies, but there were fines of 500 euros for a woman playing ball with her kids in a park and an old man being held down by the police because he didn't keep minimum distance. So we are in a sort of authoritarian laboratory. The legal situation is very unclear, and the government is not concerned with having that kind of clarity. So it's up to the police to decide how to fine people. And all these fines are actually unlawful, but it's very hard for people to stand up for their rights in this case. There already were some reactions by workers to this. You can see an image of workers assembling in front of their plant. That happened a month ago, I think, but we don't have much information about these instances of spontaneous strikes because they are not covered in the media. That was only covered by a local newspaper and spread through the internet, so that was more of an accident. But I can tell you a bit more about workers' fights that were sort of related to Corona during or after Corona. For instance, we had nurses struggling for equal pay. They introduced a new contract in Viennese hospitals, which was really bad for older workers, or like they just had the new contract with a certain date, and if you had entered before, you'd have the old and worse contract, worse at least in terms of the wages. So that was a very complicated situation, but what was important for nurses was to have the chance to choose between the 2 contracts. And they actually won their struggle, so they could join, or at least they were granted being able to join at some between the contracts, granted to choose between the contracts at some point in the future, but they still can't. So there's a lot of anger about this. Then there are also problems of bad equipment. They don't have enough masks. The conditions are not as hygienic as they should be. And workers are angry, but there have not really been any public actions yet. And I think it's also difficult to find ways, but we will see how that will develop. Another example, which was directly affected by Corona, was the social workers and private care workers who were fighting for a shorter working day. There were strikes before Corona. This was a very interesting and dynamic situation of workers who are not in a very strong position because they work in really small plants. And there, so the possibility to fight together or organize is more difficult, but they somehow managed to do that. And their demand was only to have a 35-hour working week. At the moment, they have at the moment they have a 38.5-hour working week, so that's quite a reduction. And that would also mean a salary that is 8% higher. However, due to Corona, all the demonstrations were canceled. So the union leadership just talked with the representatives of the employees, and they really made a bad bargain of only 2.7% higher wages, and at some point in the future a reduction of 1.5 hours. So they got a 37-hour week instead of a 35-hour week. And this was directly affected by not being able to demonstrate publicly. So in order to give a brief perspective of what is going on, where the situation might lead to, the economy in Austria is slowly rebooted at the moment. I think it's important for Austria that our economy, well, at least for our ruling class, that their economy gets a small advantage over other economies. But they're also risking new infections, of course. So in terms of our health, it's really bad. Profits are put over health very clearly. The restrictions on democratic rights are lifted. Well, they aren't lifted at all, while the restrictions on the economy are lifted really fast. And the question who should pay for that crisis, the Corona, or sort of what was the talk that the economic crisis is caused by Corona, which is a big question, but the whole crisis will demand to be paid by someone. So there will be a lot of austerity in the future probably, and cuts. And that is what we actually have to fight against. And I've also shown you two sectors of the working class, which are very combative at the moment. And I think there might be some perspective for common struggle. Thank you.